We live in a strange era where we have little boxes of infinite knowledge in our hands, but at the same time, our government, police, and random bad actors all want to exploit what they can to make a buck or to exert their power over you. We've seen police unlock people's phones without permission, use the local cell towers to triangulate and prove where someone was at a certain time, and all kinds of other dark invasions of our privacy from every side, from law enforcement to Google. With that in mind, it's important to cover all of our bases, and because the providers of the operating system of these phones aren't exactly the most reliable, I'll be linking every app that I mention, both with the Google Play Store and with another source called F-Droid, which is a known platform for downloading APK files that you can then sideload into your device. Unfortunately, if you're watching this video sometime in the future, you may not have the ability to sideload APK files from F-Droid or anywhere else without some serious modification to your device because of Google's intent to close the Android source and restrict unsigned applications from being installed. I'll be making a video about that once circumvention methods are discovered. Also, please note that this is a guide on securing your personal phone, not for securing a phone that you plan to have to get rid of at some point. For that, I'll have a video releasing after this one specifically covering what you need to know about burner phones. Back to your personal phone. I would recommend watching this entire video before taking steps to improve your phone's security, as you may not need to do every step mentioned, and some are less obvious than others when it comes to choosing how you should approach them. This is going to be quite a long video, so I know some of you might be wondering how the hell I can justify this long of a video for a topic like this when every other YouTuber claims to walk you through it in 10 minutes. Hi, I'm Crux. I'm a certified cybersecurity analyst, licensed private investigator, and hobbyist security researcher. In the past couple of years, I have spent a significant amount of time optimizing IT security policies across a number of startup and Fortune 500 companies. One of the standard tools, or responsibilities on a grander scale, in my line of work is called MDM, or Mobile Device Management. In layman's terms, this means I'm the one responsible for making sure that employees don't get pwned by some hacker because their device was vulnerable. What I'm saying is, this is my bread and butter. I do this a lot and have learned a lot of this the hard way through responding to incidents or experimenting with contained networks. You've probably seen a few videos on this topic where the host Googled some surface level knowledge, but today we're going to be going into the deeper technical level on a lot of what we'll be discussing. For the sake of time, I'll be packing in as much information into this video as densely as I can while providing a wide array of sources and further reading in the description for anyone interested. Before we get deep into the weeds, it's very important that I stress the fact that security and privacy are two very different fields of concern, which can get confusing. I know it's a bit early in the video to start shilling my other content, but if privacy is your concern, start with my Private Investigator's Guide to Personal Data Security, OPSEC 101 course, and then come back to this one. I know that both of these videos are a lot of information to absorb, but I hope that I've laid both out in a way that makes them both easy and fun to learn from. For this course, we will be focusing entirely on security. Applying the best practices and countermeasures from OPSEC 101, along with following this video on security, should put you in the best position to practically never have your most used device or your personal data compromised. Earlier I mentioned that the difference between security and privacy can get confusing. What do I mean by that? Well, when words like OPSEC or operational security come into play, they don't always mean exactly what they seem. While they do have some overlap in some places, including in naming, the general practices and tools involved don't completely overlap. Operational security is about protecting sensitive information, in this case, your private information, from snooping eyes or people who would seek to abuse having access to it. That puts OPSEC generally more on the privacy side of house. Confusing, I know. But it might be easier to think of the OPSEC side as data privacy, where what we'll be discussing today is information security, the barriers that allow us to protect our information in the first place. Where data privacy is the practices and techniques that we employ to protect our data, information security is the defenses that we put in place. Firewalls, VPNs, etc. There are many things we can do to build buffers that slow down or outright prevent an attack or compromise of our data privacy. But for now, let's talk about how these devices function on a base level, and then we'll move into choosing a phone. Inside of your phone lie two very important processor units that are effectively both operating as independent computers. While we don't know the exact size of these chips, I can say pretty confidently that both are less than an inch wide and only a few centimeters thick, if they're even that big. It's hard to really describe the scale of how tiny these chips are. These two little processors are the backbone of your entire phone, and understanding how they work is key to understanding what role your device plays in the grand scheme of cellular networks. The first processor is called the application processor. The application processor can generally be referred to as the brain of your phone, and this is the chip that controls everything from the camera to the graphics, audio, and display processing to the security features built in by the manufacturer. Anytime a phone manufacturer releases some cutting-edge new feature, it happens here, and you better believe that every manufacturer has their own special sauce in the mix for their proprietary chips. If you'd like to learn more about any particular application processor, I've linked the technical documents of the big three in the description for you to check out, but for now, you know what you need to know to follow this video. The other chip in your device is called the Cellular Baseband Processor, or Modem Processor. These are a bit trickier to explain than the application processor, as the actual functionality of these chips is a tightly guarded secret by the manufacturers who produce them, and on top of that, there are only a small handful of manufacturers on the market. While a couple of these are made by the manufacturer who makes the device it's going in, the catch there is that even they don't have full control over what happens on the modem processor. This chip runs its own independent operating system separate from the application processor and is responsible for handling all cellular connections and communications on your device. While there are companies like Samsung and Apple which manufacture and use their own modem processors now, the main two other manufacturers that you will see are Qualcomm, which produces modem processors for US-based phones, and MediaTek, which is primarily used in the majority of the rest of the world. We'll be talking more about these chips in a later section. IMEI and IMSI are two of the many identifiers within your device that are probably the most important to understand. IMEI, or International Mobile Equipment Identity, is a unique numeric identifier for devices using GSM, or the Global System for Mobile... Are you checking out from all the abbreviations yet? I know, that's already a lot. So what we're going to do is take a few minutes to talk about the four most important abbreviations that you need to know to understand how your device works at a deeper level. There are many other identifiers within your device, especially if it's an older model relying on some of the older variants of cellular networks, but these four will apply to pretty much every modern phone, so let's break them down, starting with GSM. The Global System for Mobile Communications, or GSM, may be more familiar to you as 2G. 2G, or the second generation cellular network, is one of the most important technological breakthroughs in our modern history. The first generation was developed in the 80s and functioned entirely on analog audio signals, quite like a radio. The second generation, 2G, was the first to be fully digital and was rolled out in the early 90s. While this technology may be over 30 years old at this point, it was and still is incredibly vital in supporting some regions for voice and text services, and in some places still remains a fallback for the more advanced 3G, 4G, and 5G networks. On top of this, Internet of Things devices still regularly use 2G networking. This is going to include things like smart meters, remote sensors, and other somewhat low-tech devices. While the majority of US-based carriers have phased out both 2G and 3G for the LTE-based 4G and 5G networks, there are still a substantial amount of devices that you can find out in the wild that still support these bands. This is a problem that we'll be discussing later in the video. In the early stages of development for this new technology, all the way back in 1987, there was a Memorandum of Understanding, which is basically just fancy business talk for a mutual agreement between parties, signed by 13 operators, that's the cellular companies, across 12 countries that all committed to deploying GSM for their mobile services. At that moment, the seeds were planted for what would in 1995 culminate in the formation of the GSM MOU Association, later shortened to GSM Association, or GSMA. This non-profit trade association is the de facto authority ruling over the type allocation code system, which is used to create IMEI numbers. While the networking standards and types have changed and GSM networks are effectively phased out at this point, the GSMA still holds that authority over the IMEI numbers and charges exorbitant licensing fees from carriers to purchase them in batches. Just like with GSM networks themselves and the cutting of support for them, this is also a problem that we'll be discussing in due time. The International Mobile Equipment Identity Number, or IMEI for short, is, as mentioned earlier, a unique numeric identifier for devices using the aforedescribed GSM network and are produced and licensed out by the GSMA. There is no law that says that a device must have an IMEI number, but that hasn't stopped the GSMA from forcing it down the throat of the majority of cell manufacturers. That means that the vast majority of phones that you can get your hands on will have an IMEI attached to it. Under normal circumstances, this isn't that big of a privacy or security concern because the only entity that should be able to see your IMEI when you're using your phone is your cell service provider, and even then, most don't really use the IMEI for tracking purposes. Some do, but most won't use it for that. So what do they use it for? Well, the GSMA also operates a device registry that is used to track stolen phones, and most providers will occasionally scan their network to see if these stolen IMEI identified phones are active. This presents some concerns for us because buying a used phone on a service like eBay could easily result in acquiring a phone whose IMEI is listed on the device registry as stolen. I can't say for certain that this device being detected on the network will immediately get law enforcement sent after you, but don't be surprised if you're committing crimes while in possession of a phone you bought for cheap online and the cops try to tack on some extra stolen property charge just for the sake of doing so. Luckily, there are ways to check this registry for yourself, and in the case of buying a used phone, you can pretty easily justify a chargeback or maybe even eBay's money-back guarantee by notifying your bank or eBay that the device you purchased turned out to be on the stolen device registry. The International Mobile Subscriber Identity, or IMSI for short, is a little bit different than the IMEI. While this is another identifier like IMEI numbers, IMSI is specifically used on a carrier basis, meaning that this is the identity number your service provider gives you as a subscriber on their network. Where the IMEI identifies a device, the IMSI identifies a subscriber, and while IMEI numbers are primarily used for GSM and more evolved networks, IMSI are used across every type of network. Note that I said subscriber and not customer or person, because a subscriber can be represented as a SIM card or eSIM. If you as the customer go into your local store for your provider and the employee in the store gives you a new SIM card for your phone, that will outright change the IMSI number attached to that device. If you remove that SIM card and put it into another device, that new device will have the IMSI number attached to that SIM. This identifier is important to understand because in the same way that an IMEI can be used against you, the IMSI can as well. There have been situations such as protests where individuals had their personal phones with them while engaging in protesting activities without ever knowing that the police and even their own provider were monitoring that area through the cellular towers to identify who was there and when they were there. Charges have been brought against protesters identified this way days and weeks after the protests they were involved in. Maybe that's a concern for you. I don't know, but either way, that leads us into discussing how cell phone networks work. You probably already know that cellular networks rely on towers scattered around to provide signal for you to connect to their service. What you may not be aware of is that these towers are very specifically planned out in rough hexagonal grids which provide some overlap between towers. This is particularly handy in situations like where you may be walking down the street or riding public transit. This overlap allows for seamless handovers of your calls from one tower to the next without dropping the call or causing interruptions. Of course, this necessitates the ability to know where the devices in use are, so they all have GPS modules installed in them, as well as other telemetry that allow these towers to specifically pinpoint where a device is by measuring the strength of the signal against the strength of the signal between that device and other towers. This means that even without the GPS location setting enabled, you can still be triangulated through the use of cellular towers, which won't be as accurate as GPS, but will still be accurate to within 100 meters in most situations. On top of that ability to triangulate you at any given time, these towers also keep individualized logs of every device that passes through their net, transmits data, or receives data. They log the IMEI and IMSI of every device, and sometimes even run those IMEIs through the stolen device registry. The telemetry built into these towers can and has been used in criminal proceedings to definitively establish when and where a person was located, who they spoke to, and exactly what the message was if it was a text message. We'll circle back to discussing how to prevent this from being used against you, but for now, let's talk about choosing a phone. There are dozens of brands out there that slap their own label on a phone from some factory in China and brand it as unique for whatever spin they've put on it. Among these brands are actual tools of espionage, and not the cool kind where you do spy stuff, the creepy kind where the Chinese government spies on you directly through your device. That's exactly what Huawei and ZTE were accused of when they were banned in the United States, and obviously, due to these bans, these are brands you should avoid and keep note of because their devices were decently spread before their ban. Ironically, that narrows us down to 3 of the most generally secure phones that also come from 3 of the more intrusive companies when it comes to privacy with most of their products. With their phones, you can remove most of the telemetry and get them to the point of being relatively secure, but you'll always have it in the back of your head which company produced the operating system or device. If you haven't figured it out by now, the 3 companies that I'm referring to are Apple, Google, and Samsung. These 3 brands are generally the most secure on the market when it comes to hardware and software security, and they stay on top of regularly updating their systems to prevent vulnerabilities. It's sort of hard to say which one of the 3 produces a more secure device, as more secure is a bit of an open-ended question. I recommend each of the 3 because, as I said a moment ago, they are generally the most secure. That's both hardware and software secure. All 3 families of phones come packaged with hardware that reinforces the security of the devices. Google Pixels come with the Titan M, which is an enterprise-grade security chip built directly into the device. iPhones have their own equivalent known as the Security Enclave, and Samsung has what they call the Security Element chip, which is supported by a suite of software-based security tools called Samsung Knox. While the manufacturer of each of these devices does present privacy concerns, we really can't do anything about that if we want to have any reasonable level of security. If you're concerned with the idea of a company like Google invading your privacy, then you should probably watch my How Corporations and Social Media Spy on You video, and then understand that the majority of phones branded as being more secure than the 3 of these are typically straight out of China, especially if they claim to be more free than other devices. Looking at you, Freedom Phone and Unplugged. Don't get scammed by devices that claim to be better than the big 3 because you'll just be out $1,000 with a shitty Chinese market Android in your pocket. This is going to sound like a joke, but I'm completely serious about including a section saying that you should get a good hard-shell phone case. Preferably, either one with a screen protector of some kind, or with a third-party screen protector. This is a video about physical device security, so it wouldn't exactly be complete without this recommendation. It's also a good time to note that pretty much any phone you chose out of the recommended list will likely be at its cheapest several $100s, and in some cases, you can pump those numbers up to several $1,000s. It's most likely worth your time and money to invest $50 or so into a really good case. Read, one that isn't Chinese Amazon garbage. Otterbox, Juggernaut, doesn't matter. Just invest the money in something that won't fail when you inevitably drop your device. It happens to everyone, so might as well prepare for it. This is a difficult subject to approach in a video like this due to the sheer volume of laws at play in different jurisdictions across the country, but it's important to know your rights when it comes to your device and what law enforcement can and can't do with it. In 99% of cases, law enforcement are required by law to get a warrant to access your device, even after you've already been arrested, unless you give them consent to access it, which you should never do under any circumstance. I don't care if you did whatever you're accused of or not. Do not give them consented access to your device, or you will regret it. Back to the warrant. Even if they get it, they're on their own getting into your device. Compelling you to provide your password against your will is a violation of your Fifth Amendment rights. Now, that being the case, some jurisdictions have ruled that law enforcement are allowed to force you into unlocking biometric locks, and we'll discuss that later. There's also the little matter of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is supposedly to allow for warrantless searches of non-US citizens' devices, but incidentally has and is still used to surveil American citizens. If I start talking about that here, I won't shut up about it, so expect another video on that eventually, or go watch my video, The United Police States of America, if you want a little taste of how it's already being used. For now though, let's move into setting up your device. First things first, we should ideally set up the phone from the default image. This means factory resetting and going from square one if you've already been using your preferred phone for a while. You don't absolutely have to do this, but it's the best way to completely clean out any files from apps that may be more invasive than we'd prefer. This is also an effective means of removing most common malware. Once we're at square one, or as close as you're willing to get to it, it's time to update your firmware. I am one of those folks who generally see the update available notification on my phone and groan because I know I'm going to have to let it take a good 10 to 20 minutes to update itself. Even still, I update it every time a new update is available. Why? Because every update ensures that vulnerabilities found within the operating system and its apps are patched to prevent exploitation. It takes 10 minutes to prevent someone from having easy access to your entire device through some exploit you've never heard of. Speaking of exploits, let's talk about biometric locks and the law. This might sound obvious, but if we truly want to secure our phone in as many ways as we possibly can, this should include securing it from those who would seek to use our biometrics against us, including the police. You may not be aware of this, but there is a catch to the laws around police being able to access your device without a warrant. If you're using biometric locks, they can freely force you to unlock it. If you're using a password, they cannot, and if they do, it will be inadmissible in court. So, I would strongly advise you ditch the Face ID and fingerprint scanning methods of unlocking your phone, and instead use a strong screen lock. Considering the whole idea of not using biometrics, it's important to set a strong screen lock with whatever method you choose. PIN, password, swipe, anything that you have to memorize will prevent the default access that biometrics allow to police, and the harder you can make this password to guess, the more secure your phone will be. For PINs, it's generally recommended to use 6 digits instead of your average 4 due to the added security of the extra 2 digits, raising the total number of possible combinations from 10,000 if using 4 digits to 1 million if using 6 digits. This dramatically increases the difficulty in attempting to brute force your password, especially if using a generally strong one. That means no hitting 0 6 times. Come up with an actual 6-digit PIN and use that. Now that we've got our lock set up, let's close the windows. Crux, what do you mean by close the windows? A surprising amount of applications will allow access without ever unlocking your phone. These apps have some kind of widget on the lock screen that is usually just a swipe away. Digital wallets, flight trackers, calendars, the list goes on. One particularly noteworthy one here is Samsung Wallet, which is an app that allows you to store your credit cards digitally. By default, Samsung Wallet adds a widget to the lock screen that, when swiped, will reveal the cards that you have added to quick access. At best, this is an easy way for law enforcement to identify you. At worst, when combined with biometric locks, this can provide law enforcement, an attacker, or whoever has you and your phone in one place with direct access to whatever cards you have there. The best way to prevent all of this is to simply disable lock screen actions, which you can find instructions for on screen now for both iOS and Android devices. Pause if you need to, otherwise we're good to move on. It can be easy to get lost in a constant sea of notifications if you allow every app on your phone to push them. Going through your notification settings for each app and only allowing the most critical apps and those you care about the most to push notifications can save you a lot of headache someday, and in the meantime, will make you more likely to actually pay attention to your phone when you receive a notification because it could only be coming from a handful of apps. This, along with the next step, will make them a lot more bearable for some of you who haven't done this before. Notifications are tricky because they can be a massive hole in both your security and privacy. It can be something as simple as a dating app you didn't want a friend to know about, or maybe bad enough to expose some kind of activity you would have really preferred to keep secret. With both Android and iPhone, you can choose to hide your notifications on the lock screen, and you really should. You can tweak this to only show the icon, or not even show the icon or name of the app until the phone is unlocked. You can choose which level you prefer to use here based on your level of paranoia about someone else seeing certain notifications. Next, we need to cover something that you may not even realize is a potential attack vector: your keyboard. It's easy to overlook something so simple as a keyboard, but they're one of the most used features of your phone. Back in the day, we had physical keyboards on phones, so this wasn't really something to consider, but now, just about every phone, except for the BlackBerry, my beloved, has their keyboard controlled via software. On Android, every phone will by default come with Gboard, Samsung keyboard, Microsoft Swift key, or one of a handful of other vendor keyboards, while iPhone will come with the Apple keyboard by default. Pretty much any of these are totally fine to use, and while there are potentially some privacy concerns behind using Google or Apple's keyboards, it's a hell of a lot better than having a third-party one that effectively acts as a fancy keylogger, sending back everything you type to some random developer out there. Stick to the defaults here, and if you want to get fancy with it, try switching between the default ones. Password managers are great tools that make it pretty easy to use very secure passwords with your accounts without having to remember dozens of random character strings of junk. These tools allow you to put in one master password to access your password vault, and from there you can copy-paste your password into login pages. Many also make it even easier by either including a hook into your browser or by offering an extension that allows you to autofill. There's very little reason you shouldn't be using a password manager, at least for your most used or most important accounts, so I generally recommend them to everyone. Multi-factor authentication is a very quick way to secure your accounts against anyone who would want to maliciously access them. Generally, MFA is going to do a lot of heavy lifting in preventing unauthorized access due to the multiple layers of authentication that will always include something personal to you. The short version of MFA layers are something you know, which is a password or PIN, something you have, like your phone or a physical security key, and something you are, as in biometric data, facial recognition, or voice recognition. Combining two or more of these factors, as they are called, is how you achieve multi-factor authentication. You're probably familiar with the use of MFA applications like Google and Microsoft's Authenticators, and honestly, either of those will serve really well for any accounts that allow you to set an MFA key with them. If you're already a fan of my channel, you were probably wondering when this section would come up. It's no secret that I'm a big fan of virtual private networks, and that's also the case when it comes to smartphones. If you're going to be using any kind of Wi-Fi network that doesn't belong to you, it's always a good idea to use a VPN. VPNs encrypt your traffic and make it very difficult to intercept your data on compromised networks and hide what you're doing from your internet service provider. You may not be aware of this, but VPNs also work on mobile data in the same way they do when using them on a computer. You're still concealing your traffic from your service provider. In general, it's just a good idea to use one as it's a very affordable extra layer of both security and privacy. Little note here, VPN usage on a phone for mobile data can increase your overall data usage by anywhere from 4% to 20%, so keep that in mind if you have a limited data plan and frequently get close to your data cap. Pretty much every phone on the market ships with at least a handful of applications that won't be of much use to you or aren't ideal for the purpose they serve. This includes apps like Samsung News and their internet browser, any of the wide array of Google apps that come with Androids, and the absolutely locked down ecosystem of iPhone apps. That one's a bit more complicated to disable the defaults on, but with Pixels and Samsung phones, you can pretty easily disable most of the default apps. I say most as, depending on which family of phone you bought, there will be different apps you can't disable or remove. One final very good practice that I want to mention here in the basic setup is storing backups of your contact information. I don't mean just on your Apple, Google, or Samsung account. I mean physically. Write down your contacts somewhere that is private to you. You never know when you may completely lose access to your phone and need this information stored outside of it. Additionally, if you're on the more security conscious side, like we'll be discussing starting in this next section, this is a great way to get a head start on that. It's pretty hard to steal your contact information if it's not even saved on your device. Up to this point, we've only covered the basics for the average user. If you discovered this video through your YouTube homepage or recommended, then you're likely going to fall into this category for security-conscious users. You're probably familiar with most of what we've talked about up to this point, but you'll most likely start to learn some new stuff here, as a lot of this information isn't really on the mind of the general public. The vast majority of this section is based heavily off of my experience working in corporate environments. We can take a lot of those enterprise-level strategies and carry them over to our own devices to fortify our security a bit more than the average user, so let's take some time to talk about them. At this level, we should really start to consider all the data that we keep on our devices. Photos, messages, voicemails, all of these things are potentially ammo to be used against you for blackmail, conviction, or more simply, an awkward situation. I'm probably not the only one who has looked at the photo gallery before and seen that the number of photos was in the thousands. Every single one of these photos is another detail about your life, and if someone gets control of your phone, they have control of all those details. It's best to start exporting that stuff to somewhere your data will be safer and regularly keep up with those exports. Delete the files once you've copied them off of your device. Autofill is a very convenient way to put in your passwords to log into various websites and applications, but can present itself as a gaping security hole if someone manages to get past your first layer of security. Because of this, the security-conscious user shouldn't be using autofill at all, including the version offered by password managers like 1Pass. Instead, you should be opening the Password Manager app, copying the appropriate password for the account you're trying to access, and pasting it manually into the password box. It's a little bit less convenient, but goes a long way towards defending your account security. This may sound like a strange bit of advice, but if you want to add an extra layer of security, it doesn't hurt to log out of applications and websites when not using them. Session token scraping and other forms of attack rely on the cookies that store your session token, which is essentially a little flag that tells a website you've logged into it and intend to stay logged in. And if one of these are stolen from you, then your attacker can entirely bypass multi-factor authentication as they aren't logging in. They're already logged in. While this isn't an attack vector that most people will fall victim to, it's something worth considering for the security-conscious user. It's always better to be safe than sorry when it comes to things like this if you're genuinely trying to improve your security posture. Being proactive is key. Speaking of, let's get into the next section. Proactive and reactive security applications are a great way to get a little bit of extra peace of mind and ensure that your device isn't compromised by malware. There are some great antivirus apps out there like Hypatia, which is a free and open source app available on F-Droid, though it does go a little bit deeper than just antivirus apps. Tools like Find My Phone and remote wiping apps fall under this list, as well as tools that alert you if any of your accounts have been included in a breach dump somewhere online. Generally for this, I recommend Have I Been Pwned, though the only official way to access their tool is through their website. There are some phone apps that are essentially wrappers for the site, but there isn't much reason to add a middleman here. Surprise, motherfucker! More abbreviations. Don't worry, these are easy and won't require their own sections. These identifiers are known as a few different things depending on your device, and for the sake of everyone's sanity, I'll be referring to all of them as advertising ID. But I might as well run you through the various versions real quick. Apple refers to it as IDFA, or Identifier for Advertisers. Google calls their implementation GAID, or Google Advertising ID, and formerly called it Android ID, Android Device ID, or Android Advertising ID, all abbreviating to AAID. Microsoft, surprisingly being the most sane among the developers, simply refers to it as ADID, or Advertising ID, like I will be doing here. Now that we've gotten through all of that, what the hell even is an advertising ID? In the words of Google themselves, the advertising ID is a unique, user-resettable, and user-deletable ID for advertising provided by Google Play services. It gives users better control and provides developers with a simple, standard system to continue to monetize their apps, and it enables users to reset or delete their identifier. Yeah, okay, sure. So obviously, we're going to want to go and delete that as soon as possible. The method for doing so will vary by device, so you'll probably want to check a guide for your specific device, but the result is the same across the board. Deleting your advertising ID permanently removes the unique identifier on your mobile device that apps and advertisers use to track your activity to show you personalized ads. If you want to learn more about why advertisements seem suspiciously accurate about the things you've talked about, then maybe after this you should check out my video, How Corporations and Social Media Spy on You. But for now, let's move on to USB debugging. You may not be aware of this, but there was a time that it was a default setting on Android devices to have USB debugging enabled. This was a bit concerning because that means someone like me could plug another device into your phone and completely pwn it in seconds. Of course, this would be a terrible thing to still have on by default, but luckily that hasn't been the case since roughly Android 2. If you haven't been messing with the developer mode on your phone, it is very unlikely that USB debugging is actually enabled, but it never hurts to check, especially if you're using a very old device. Both Android and iPhone can enable this as an option, and it's typically going to be buried in the developer settings across both platforms. But the majority of you should not have this on at the time of watching this video unless you already know way more than I do about device hacking. There isn't much reason to be giving every app on your phone access to every internal service. You may be familiar with the little pop-up that will show up when you install a new app where it's asking you for permission to do things with your phone. Many apps, and I mean a lot of them, that will show up on the Play Store or the App Store will ask for way too much when it comes to accessing your device, and if you aren't paying attention, you may have given some potentially malicious actor access to things they shouldn't have access to. You can and should go through the application permissions list to restrict applications that don't absolutely need certain permissions from having them. There is no reason a game or social media application should have access to making calls or looking at your contacts. There is no reason for any application outside of delivery, rideshare, or maps to have access to your location. It's up to you what permissions you want to allow for your various applications, but I would strongly recommend using this opportunity to absolutely minimize the permissions of everything across your entire device. It's no secret that if law enforcement get their hands on your phone, they can rip basically everything that is stored on it, and this includes your biometric data. Now, I typically like to source everything I say in these videos with links in the description, but this is one of those things where confirmation is very hard to achieve. Between search engines being astroturfed heavily narrative-controlled garbage and law enforcement going out of their way to try to hide information around this, there is basically no source I can give you. That being said, this is one of those cases where it is honestly best to not mess around with it. Completely disable any biometrics and remove your saved fingerprints and eye scans. If you're extra paranoid, factory reset and start from square one if you did have biometric data on your device. They may still be able to pull fingerprints off of the outside of the device, but they won't be able to take the digital copies of them. I'm pretty open about the fact that I am not a big fan of the police, especially when it comes to how they stomp on people's rights during protests. The majority of the content on this channel is catered towards defending your security and privacy against law enforcement and anyone who would seek to do you some sort of harm through the use of your data or personal information. You are more likely to have a police officer abuse access to your phone or personal devices than you are having some hacker go after you. And if you're involved in protests, guerrilla activism, or are a whistleblower, then you're going to have a much deeper level of concern about physical security than you would otherwise. Because of this, it's important that I include a section here in this video specifically catered to that side of house because they are at risk of dealing with a higher threat level than most others. Earlier I spoke briefly about not keeping too much of your personal data on your device, and at this point we should be taking that another step deeper. Remove every single piece of data that isn't directly related to your objective. Everything from personal files to things you've downloaded off of social media or wherever. You should be considering the fact that if law enforcement gets their hands on your device and you haven't managed to lock it down in time, they will absolutely be going through every byte stored on it. They will see everything, and you better believe they will go out of their way to tack on random charges based on what they see in there. Will those charges stick? Who knows? I'm not a lawyer. but that's not something I personally want to deal with, as each additional charge is wasted money and time that you could outright avoid wasting by being proactive about the data on your device. At this level, we should be preparing our devices to be as slimmed down as possible. That means removing every application that is non-critical to the activity you're going to be involved in. Disable every Google, Samsung, or Apple installed software that you can. This includes AI assistants, rideshare platforms, anything that is not directly related to your mission. We don't know what exactly every app out there does, when it phones home, when it taps into the GPS, things like that. Nor do we know which apps will bend the knee to law enforcement when they come knocking. So, the less you have on the device overall, the better. Slim it down to only the applications you need. Keeping in line with removing all non-critical applications at this point, we should also be outright disabling the GPS location services within your device's settings menu. This may seem like a bit of an extreme step to take, but when we're trying to prepare our device for any kind of protest or guerrilla activity, it's important that we have as much control over it as possible, so every little step we take to further fortify the security is another layer in the onion. When it comes to the network that your phone connects to, there are many levels of connection that are typically known as generational telecommunications networks. 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G are probably terms that you're familiar with, and each denote which generation of this technology you're connecting through. This is important to understand because law enforcement have a tool at their disposal called the Stingray. The Stingray is also known as a cell site simulator or an IMSI catcher, and these devices mimic cell phone towers to locate and identify cell phones. This can be very bad for you if you're engaged in something like a protest, because the police can use that as evidence to show that you were involved and potentially attempt to bring charges against you for things you may or may not have been involved in. The catch with these tools is that they heavily rely on the more insecure 2G network to intercept phones from the more powerful carrier towers. That means we can just about entirely reduce the risk of these tools being used against us by simply outright disabling the 2G network on our devices. At the time of writing this video, many phones can be toggled to block the 2G network, but the majority of phones on the market are not set to do this by default. Android, Pixel, iOS, doesn't matter. All have the option with different names. On iPhone, it will typically be called lockdown mode, and on Android, you're going to have to dig around in the network settings to find it, as it can be in different places on different phones. Sometimes the simplest solutions truly are the most effective. Airplane mode is very reliable when you need to immediately cut all wireless communications from 2G to Wi-Fi. It won't cut your GPS, so location services will still be active unless you disabled them outright with the previous suggestion, and you won't be pinging cellular towers or accepting any kind of ping from a device like a Stingray. It's very easy to enable airplane mode, as pretty much every device on the market will have it in the drop-down menu on the top bar, and you can disable it as easily as you enabled it. If you miss any calls while in airplane mode, your phone will notify you after you turn it off, as long as your carrier offers a missed call service. Text messages should also immediately come through after turning it off, so you generally won't be missing anything by using this tool when appropriate. While airplane mode is an extremely convenient and effective way to cut off your phone from most methods of outside communication, it's still connected to GPS. An alternative, or extra step you can take, is to use a Faraday bag when not using your device. A Faraday bag blocks incoming and outgoing electromagnetic signals by creating a conductive enclosure, preventing wireless signals from escaping or entering, which would immediately protect us from law enforcement or a bad actor deploying a Stingray, but more importantly, it prevents tracking. If no wireless signals can escape, then the GPS module simply cannot function, rendering the phone a useless brick until you remove it from the bag. I'm sure you could see how this could be useful, so use your imagination and find neat ways to use them. Under normal circumstances, we could pretty reliably make public Wi-Fi safe to use through the use of VPNs and various other tools, but in the case of activism or protesting, it is pretty essential that you do not connect to any publicly available Wi-Fi with your phone. There is a more than 0% chance that any network established around the point of a protest could either be purpose-built for intercepting communications, or could be temporarily compromised by law enforcement, as we've seen them do in many protests. They're so proud of doing this that the documentation on how they do this is public, And as we discussed earlier, these tools have come to be known as stingrays. Because of the absolutely huge potential of being intercepted by a rogue or fake network at protests or events, it's best to just avoid using public Wi-Fi at all costs in these situations. Would you believe me if I told you that the SMS messaging services built into your device offer end-to-end encryption by default? On Apple devices, if you send a message and the text bubble is blue, and on Android devices, if you send a message that has the lock symbol under it, that's the signal that your message is secured with E2EE or end-to-end encryption. On Android devices, you may need to enable the RCS or chat features option in the settings on your messaging app, but it will absolutely be available for you to use on any modern device. Now I know what you're thinking. Crux, couldn't the carrier just look at my messages? And the answer to that is a resounding no. End-to-end encryption means what it sounds like it means. Only the two endpoints can decrypt the message. That means if you're using an iPhone and iMessage with E2EE enabled, then no carrier can intercept those messages. They can see that a message was sent, the size of the data, and that's pretty much it. Of course, this requires you to give someone your phone number, which you may or may not want to do. That's where other applications come into play, and we're going to take a moment to talk about a few of them. Signal. I know you've heard of this one. It's gotten a lot of publicity, both good and bad, but notably, there hasn't been anything about someone's messages being breached outside of phishing attacks, which is an end-user error, not a hardware or software error. Signal is rather interesting in that it does require you to share your phone number with the application itself for the purpose of registering an account and enabling contact discovery, but you don't have to use the contact discovery feature and can easily make your phone number private so other users don't see it and only see the username you chose. From there, Signal works like a typical messaging or chat application, and it looks pretty much the same as the default Android one. E2EE is enabled by default here, so any messages you send or receive will be encrypted. It's also important to note that Signal offers destructive messages, which is really just a neat way of saying that you can set a timer for the message to be deleted on both ends after being read. This timer can be set anywhere from 5 seconds to 1 week. Personally, I think this is a great feature, and you should strongly consider using it. WhatsApp. This is another very widely known application, and if you have any family outside of the United States, it is very likely that you're in some big group chat with them already. The good news is that, like Signal, this application has E2EE enabled by default. The bad news is that the parent company running the show is Meta, previously Facebook, and they are widely known as one of the most privacy-invading corporations on the planet. This is one of those situations where you are giving up long-term privacy for convenience, as the application is very easy to use and very easy to find your friends and family in. But with that convenience comes giving Meta a potential backdoor into all of your conversations. At the time of writing this video, there is no real evidence pointing towards Meta having a backdoor into WhatsApp conversations, but it genuinely would not surprise me if they did, considering their track record of literally surveilling people to push more advertising to them. At the end of the day, it's important to remember that this is the same company that decided it would be a good idea to track when young females delete selfies so they can immediately be shown beauty product ads. That's incredibly evil, and due to this track record, I personally do not trust anything they own. You'll have to decide for yourself how you feel about all of this. Finally, we have Telegram, and this is another application you've probably heard of, but the catch with this one is that it is not encrypted by default. With Telegram, you'll need to create a secret chat for the messages to be encrypted, which raises a concern across all of these applications. If you aren't safe about your device's security, it wouldn't be too hard for someone to just open your chat history and start reading it. This means we still need to keep our security in mind when using these applications, and should enable some form of locking them when not in use. Luckily, all of the applications that we just talked about allow you to enable screen lock or to add multi-factor authentication to them. At this point, you should already be using these other tools, and incorporating them into your playbook alongside E2EE is a solid way to protect your private conversations. Depending on what you plan on doing with your phone, knowing how to very quickly fully wipe it may be something you need to know how to do. Luckily, there's a relatively fast method of factory resetting both Androids and iPhones, with Google Pixels using the same method as Androids. For iPhones, you'll unfortunately be locked to having to go into the settings menu, and if using an Android, you can go into the About Phone page where you should find a reset button at the very bottom. Click that, and there should be a factory data reset button. Now, when it comes to Android, that is actually the slower way of doing it. iPhones won't be able to do this, but with any Android from a Samsung to a Google Pixel, you can enter the recovery menu by powering off your phone and then holding the volume up and power buttons at the same time for about 10 seconds until it boots into the recovery menu. Release the keys you were holding to enter this menu. Now, you can use the up and down volume buttons to navigate and the power button to select. You should see an option that says Wipe Data/Factory Reset. That's your emergency nuclear button. You may never need to use it, but now you know it's there. You may not be aware that you can do this, but you can encrypt your phone pretty easily, and this is a great option if you want to make your data completely unrecoverable in the event that you feel that you need to emergency factory reset it, or you anticipate potentially being apprehended by law enforcement. For the legal people at YouTube, this is completely legal. There is nothing illegal about encrypting your device, and there are many protections against police breaking into your device without cause. Now, all of that out of the way, it's important that I point out that there are both upsides and downsides to encrypting your device, so let's briefly cover those. Firstly, as I already mentioned, encryption is a very good way of preventing your data from falling into the wrong hands in case someone else comes into possession of your phone. If you know that you have a chance of being apprehended by someone who would intend to go through your device, then you can simply shut down the device when not in use, because every boot will require you to input a password to decrypt it. This will take a little bit of time to actually decrypt and boot up, but as far as I understand, there is currently at the time of writing this video, no method for law enforcement or hackers to get through that encryption, short of guessing or brute forcing your password, which would be prevented by the hard-coded lockouts that will trigger after so many failed password attempts. Combining this with knowing the key combination to factory reset can make your device absolutely useless to any attacker. Now let's talk about the downsides. As mentioned earlier, this will slow down booting up your device. You would think this might cause some slowdown in normal use of your device, but these days that's not an issue you'll notice at all with the modern hardware accelerated encryption being used. What it will do is cause some complications if you later decide to root your phone, which we will be discussing in a section pretty soon, but it's nothing that can't be solved by backing up your data appropriately and taking the normal steps to root. One downside that some folks on Reddit have noted is that if you ever have a situation where your phone reboots for whatever reason, be it an update applied automatically or the phone just deciding that it wanted to reboot, it will be stuck at the decryption password input screen until you pull it out of your pocket and put in your password, so you may miss some calls or messages due to this. Additionally, the phone is only encrypted when it's encrypted, meaning that after you've put in the password and are playing around on your phone, if someone apprehends you and the phone is unlocked, it's just as open as it would be without the encryption. And at that point, your screen lock is your only saving grace if the screen turns off before they pull everything from it. A device that is already unlocked is basically free evidence for law enforcement, so keep that in mind. Overall, encrypting your phone is a genuinely good idea for the most part for anyone that falls into this category. I almost put this into the security conscious user category, but considering the fact that it only really applies when rebooting the device, which requires much more active effort to enable than most other tools in that category, I decided to put it here where it will matter the most. If you're watching this section with genuine intent to use these techniques and tools for whatever reason falls under this section, then you should seriously consider encrypting right now. It's likely that you've heard of the term de-googling before. This is the practice of disabling as many connections to Google as is feasible for the user to tolerate. What do I mean by that? Well, these devices are designed to work as an ecosystem. Play Store, Google mobile services, and other built-in from the factory applications are considered critical to the operation of other applications, and as such will cause you some problems if you remove them without replacing others that require them. There are some guides that you can find that will walk you through this process, but because this is a pretty in-depth topic that will require you to make personal decisions about what exactly you do and don't need on your device, I won't be walking you through how to do it here. Maybe in a future video. If you want to see that, leave a comment about it. Rooting, or jailbreaking depending on which platform you use, is a very in-depth method of gaining complete root or administrator control over your device. Rooting your device will allow you to do some interesting things with the modem processor that we'll talk about in another section soon, but primarily the purpose of rooting is to take control over the application side. This allows you to outright remove applications that were built into your device from the factory and are resistant to removal without rooting. We're talking about all those applications from Samsung and Google that you can only disable instead of remove. You may have noticed that in the previous section I never actually said the word remove, and that was intentional. That's because under normal circumstances, you won't be able to outright remove the internal applications. After rooting your device, you can do pretty much whatever you want when it comes to applications. I don't know why you would particularly want to, but I'm pretty sure this extends even as far as the phone application that allows you to make and receive phone calls. I'm not quite sure what would happen if you remove this, but maybe I'll try it for a video in the future. I saved this for near the end because this is honestly one of those things that I personally think leans more into a deeper level of paranoia than most people would need, and you would first have to root your device to take this step. However, you may be one of the people who actually needs to go to this level. Your options are going to be extremely limited, and generally will only allow one or maybe two options at the most, all based on what device you started with. Graphene OS is a very popular operating system in the privacy and security space, which containerizes or sandboxes the applications that you choose to run so that each is locked within their own little bubble. This is great for security, as it means that if someone wanted to break into your phone, they would first have to get through your PIN code, then get through your OS locks, then get into each sandboxed application that they want to snoop on. The problem here is that Graphene OS exclusively works on the Google Pixel line of phones, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because Google is actually one of the best providers when it comes to hardware security, but bad when it comes to privacy. So if we replace their operating system with one more focused on security and privacy, then we get a solid complete package. On the other end of the spectrum, we have operating systems like Lineage OS, which was built to be more adaptable and available for a wider array of devices from LG to Motorola and even Samsung. I will very likely have videos on the various secure operating systems for phones sometime in the near future, so stay tuned for those. It is extremely important that I preface this section by stating that what I am about to explain here is potentially illegal unless you are law enforcement. I am including this section strictly for educational purposes. I do not endorse any of my viewers to go out and do these things, and I will not be directly explaining how to do them. Again, this section is for educational purposes only. With all of that being said, let's take a moment to talk about IMEI and IMSI spoofing. There are tools and methods that will allow you to spoof these identifier numbers, and while you would think that this would be a good idea to do regularly to protect your security, it actually can come across as more suspicious than just using the one already on your device. How so? Cell towers and networks can detect these identifier numbers, as well as other identifiers like the MAC address if your phone is ever connected to Wi-Fi. I don't have proof of this exact statement, but I am pretty confident in saying that anytime your phone is connected to a cellular network of any level, it is providing a fair bit of information to the provider, particularly your IMEI, IMSI, and internet-related identifiers like the MAC address. The simplest reason I believe they are capable of doing this is due to the connections between the application processor and modem processor. Somewhere in that chain, the provider has direct access to your identifiers. Okay, I get it, Crux, but why does this matter? Well, if you're changing your IMEI, it's going to look pretty strange in the activity log of that network. With enough of this, it can raise suspicions about that device, particularly in terms of potential theft of service. This is heat we really don't need, so consider that before even thinking about changing any of these identifiers. This is another one of those things where I'm informing you that it's a possibility, but don't necessarily endorse doing it. With this final section, I think it's very important to stress the fact that there is no amount of securing your phone that will serve you more than simply not having it with you when you're worried about achieving certain levels of both security and privacy. Every issue I mentioned from triangulation to stingrays will be applicable here, and you'd be better served by using a burner phone in situations like that or when involved in things like guerrilla activism. Lucky for you, I may have released a video on burner phones by the time you're seeing this video. If that's the case, it should be linked both on screen and in the description. For those watching on release, I should have that video out very soon. Sub if you're interested in that.